Hello and welcome to everybody. My name is Salim Al-Haq. I'm the co-chair of Action Track 5 of the UN Food System Summit, along with my co-chair Sandrine Dixon de Cleve. And we are very, very pleased to welcome you to this open forum of our Action Track number 5. And we have a very exciting agenda of information and people to share with you, tell you where we are in the process. I am going to open, and then I will invite Valerie Guarnier from the Assistant Executive Director of World Food Program to give a word of welcome on behalf of WFP, who have been our anchor, UN anchor agency for Action Track 5. And then I will give you an update on the state of play, where we are at the moment, and then I'll hand over to my co-chair Sandrine Dixon de Cleve, who will go a little bit more in depth and describe the different action areas that we will be taking forward in the next phase of our work. And then we will hear from a number of our action area leads and others who will be able to share their thoughts. We won't go into much detail in anything, but we'll do some high-level discussions, and we have a few distinguished panelists, particularly the ambassador from Bangladesh and from Fiji joining us as well. So with that, let me invite Valerie Guarnier from the World Food Program to say a few words of welcome on behalf of WFP, who have been our amazing UN anchor agency for Action Track 5. Valerie, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm joining you from Cape Town, South Africa today, and I was actually just on a different virtual panel at the Stockholm Forum with Dr. Agnes Kalibata, and so, you know, food systems very much on my mind. I'm delighted to welcome you to the third Action Track 5 Open Forum, and as the UN anchor agency for this track, I joined the co-chair, Sandrine and Salim in thanking you for attending this very important event, which really provides an opportunity to get better acquainted with the Action Track 5 process and to share insights about the issues and the ideas that may help us develop the track to its full potential. We're so pleased with the progress that's been made so far to outline needed efforts to build food systems resilience. And the summit is really a timely opportunity for us all to refocus on the importance of resilient, sustainable, and inclusive food systems to eradicate hunger and malnutrition and ensure no one is left behind. It's a fresh chance to accelerate the pace towards the achievement of the SDGs through renewed awareness and commitments from all stakeholders to bring food systems onto global policy agendas and outline ideas for their transformation. WFP has decades of experience with broken food systems and fragile settings, and this made us a natural anchor agency for this track. And we know only too well how conflict, climate, economic crisis, displacement, and the recent pandemic have affected global food supply chains and disrupted the functionality of local food systems. And there is a wealth of localized knowledge and innovative solutions out there that the Food Systems Summit has the potential to unlock and bring to light through the national dialogues. And there are so many marginalized voices and first responders' expertise that we need to be able to capitalize on in order to understand what are the underlying causes of the dysfunctionality of current systems and which solutions to invest in the coming years. So for all of these reasons, I'm very pleased to be here with you. I'm looking forward to the developments beyond September to see how the future of food systems can be reshaped to the better and more resilient and adaptable to shocks, and in order to deliver healthy and nutritious food for all. So with this, I'd like to leave the floor to the co-chairs and really welcome this engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. And let me take this opportunity for thanking WFP and all your colleagues who've done a tremendous job in supporting our action track. And you mentioned the national dialogues. Let me just also say that we are planning in the next few weeks to have a national dialogue in Bangladesh, here where I am, with your colleagues, WFP, on Action Track 5 resilience as part of the Bangladesh national dialogue. So we are spreading around the world in different areas, and the Action Track 5 resilience issue is resonating quite widely, I must say. So now I would like to move us forward and give you a little bit of an update on where we are. Mimansha, can we go to the next slide? So just to remind you, particularly those of you who may have been with us in previous open forums or even new ones, the definition of resilience that we use is the common guidance on helping building resilient societies that the UN has used. It's called, it reads as follows: the ability of individuals, households, communities, cities, institutions, systems, and societies to prevent, resist, absorb, adapt, respond, and recover positively, efficiently, and effectively when faced with a wide range of risks while maintaining an acceptable level of functioning without compromising long-term prospects for sustainable development, peace and security, human rights, and well-being for all. And all of these words are extremely important, and you will see over the course of the next hour how we are going to take all of them forward under this action track. Next slide, please. So to remind you again of the objectives, 4 objectives of Action Track 5, starting with number 1 is to strengthen the foundations and build capacities. Number 2 is human resilience and empowerment. Number 3 is context-specific and systemic approaches. And then number 4 is participation, co-creation, and co-governance. I won't read the subtext under each of them, but these are the 4 broad areas that we have been given to us as Action Track 5 to take forward as our objectives. And as you'll see, we've received a huge number of ideas and solutions and game-changing solutions from a very wide variety of sources, from governments and other actors, which we have tried to put into a number of buckets. So just to give you an update, this isn't even the full list yet. This is sort of nearing the last bit as of now. We had a total of 250 solutions coming to us from in Action Track 5. In the first wave, we had 167. And then in wave 2, which has just recently stopped or closed, we have 90 so far. There's a few that we haven't processed yet. And of that 90, 23 came as paper solutions. People sent them in to us. And then 67 were part of the survey that we had available. And a lot of people filled in the survey and gave us their solutions. The diagram on the bottom describes where the solutions came from. A large number came from member states. We're extremely pleased with that. A lot came from civil society as well. And we had quite a few from the private sector, as well as from academia and research organizations. In wave 1, we had 67, of which 23 were initially prioritized, and 46 member states included in that. What we did was we docked them into the different action areas, and you will see in a few minutes the various action areas under which they have gone. We are still putting them together in the cluster. So we have a number of action areas under which we have a number of clusters of these solutions that we got. No solution has been thrown away. They're all there. They've all been clustered into these different buckets of activities. And you'll see a little bit later how they have been brought together into these clusters. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you the broad buckets or broad action areas and the subsequent areas. As just to remind you where we are at the moment, there are 5 action tracks. Action track 1 being access to safe, nutritious food for all, and there are 3 action areas under that. Action track 2 is sustainable consumption, and it has 2 action areas under that. Action track 3 is nature positive production, and there are 3 action areas under that. And action track 4 is livelihoods and equality, and there are 3 action areas under that. And then action track 5, which is us on resilience, we have 3 action areas: food systems resilience, universal food access, climate resilient development pathways for food system transformation. I should also mention that even though these action areas are clustered under the 5 action tracks, they are almost all extremely cross-cutting across the action tracks. So these may look like silos, but they're definitely not silos. And we're very pleased to have a number of our chairs from the other action tracks joining us today, and they'll be talking about a few of the things that they're doing where they're cross-cutting with action track 5. So almost every action area that you see here is not just one action track on its own. It's a number of action tracks working together as co-leads to take them forward. And we're very pleased to see that. And we, I must say, have been working very, very closely together across all the action tracks. And going forward, we have divided responsibility for shepherding things, but we are doing things very much actively together as a set of actions that should fit into a coherent system, as it is supposed to be a systemic food systems approach, and we very much take that to heart. Next slide.
Oh, I think that
I think this is the and track 5 action areas and clusters. There we are. Sandrine?
Yes, fabulous. Thank you so much, Salim, for setting the stage so beautifully. And now what we really want to do in this part of the forum is to move through the priority action areas that we've started to truly create, and then bring in some of our leads who have been allocated to some of these action areas to just give you a few key impulses around what does this actually mean and why it's so important. So, as Salim has indicated, all of the action tracks have now tried to cluster key actions in 3 key areas. For our priority action areas, we are looking very much at food systems resilience and what that actually means in terms of an integrative and nexus approach, looking at the anticipatory and risk management aspects of resilience for the system, taking into consideration, of course, the convergence of tipping points between climate change, biodiversity loss, and the pandemic, but also looking at the tipping points around conflict or fragile zones and bringing in territorial aspects that are so important here as the contextual piece. Our second key area is universal food access to build resilience. This has been made much more prevalent in our conversations. And when we look at resilience, we clearly want to look at resilience again across the value chain, bringing in people, planet, and prosperity together. So when we look at people, we found it incredibly important to think about universal food access as a human right, to build resilience within the system, to stop the commodification of food, but focus on the fact that people must have access in an equitable way across the globe. This is a real game-changing narrative that needs to occur. And we've looked at both the local aspect and regional aspect of the production of food, but also some of the trade elements and how we actually create the right market mechanisms to enable greater access. This also brings in distribution issues, etc. And then the third key area is the climate resilient development pathways. Many solutions coming in from member states and also individual solutions from different organizations have demonstrated the importance of this decade of action. How can we ensure that we have climate resilient development pathways for food systems, and also link that very closely to the UN Food Systems Summit, links to the national determined contributions, the need to ensure that we look at COP26 and the CBD COP as also landing points for climate resilient development pathways across the food system. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go very quickly through this. What you can see in the way in which we've started to organize our work and the next steps is that under these 3 key action areas, we have what we call solution clusters. So for the food system resilience, we have already allocated leads in order to look at these key issues and then under another level, if you look at 1.1, for example, 1.2 or 1.3, we've put in actually leads for each of these different clusters. What are these clusters? These are landing points for the different solutions that have actually come in. For the moment, we've gone through all the first wave of solutions, as Salim indicated in the beginning. But now we've had a second wave of 100 solutions that have come in again from member states. And we're clustering those solutions under these key areas. So for food systems resilience, we're looking at the humanitarian development peace nexus, but we're also looking at integrated approaches to resilient food systems, and then the crisis and risk management aspects of this. For universal food access to build resilience, we're looking at enhancing local production for local consumption, global and national food supply chains. And then for climate resilient development, the specifics around climate adaptation and mitigation, resilience, also working directly with the Race to Resilience team in the net zero champions work that's happening around COP26. But also looking at climate risk reduction and management. So again, the risk reduction and management and crisis aspects around risk reduction, and then the integrated international national policies and plans, as I mentioned before, bringing in key demands around the food system in the nationally determined contributions. Next slide, please. And just to show you again how we've done this. So these solutions have come in, incredible solutions from the different UN agencies, also from the different member states that have been part of this process, 20 of which have already actively engaged with us, but many more who have committed themselves in putting forward solutions. So for each of these key areas, just to give you an idea for food systems resilience, these are the different types of subclusters that we have put in place where we already have some solutions developing. And we will be bringing in the second wave of solutions under these areas. Next slide, please. The same is the process that we've used for Action Area 2, universal food access to build resilience. You can start to see where we have been clustering in terms of the local production, looking at the empowerment of women's agency for resilience. We've got some digitalization and optimization of technology solutions, global and national food supply chains, food storage and post-harvest loss, different types of policies and institutions. So again, each time trying to cluster the solutions under these key areas. Next slide, please. And then the same in terms of Action Area 3. Sorry, the slides are taking a bit of time. There we go. Climate resilient development pathways, climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. You can see that these are the key areas that so far we've started to cluster around with some of the solutions, remembering that this does not have all the solutions that we've received yet. And then the climate risk reduction management, same for integrated international national policies and plans. Next slide, please. So what I'm hoping we can do now, and Elise Buckle, who's been supporting us in terms of the incredible team that we have many who are supporting us in trying to ensure that we engage with the private sector, that we engage with all of the different member states that have already indicated that they want to work with us. We have a team, and Elise has joined us in that team, and we'll be moderating now this section where we have asked some of our action area leads to just dive a bit deeper into the key areas and issues that they see. So I'll let you now take the floor, Lise, and look forward to the discussion that we can have after this. Also bringing in the other action tracks, because what we wanted to do was bring in our leads, bring in the action tracks, and also finish off the day with some of the key impulses from some of the member states and other key leaders and champions of resilience.
Thank you so much, Sandrine, for bringing all this energy to this open forum. And now we'd like to hear from Loretta Heber. Loretta, you are joining us from Geneva. You are the chief of the branch that is responsible for the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster reduction. You're working at the UN Office for Disaster Reduction. Could you please share some of your insights on this first action area, which is very important on how we build food systems resilience, but looking at it through your lens of disaster reduction. Over to you. You have about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm really pleased that I'm able to speak about how we see food systems in the context of disaster risk management. And as we know, we are all living in an ever more connected world where risks and shocks in one area can have devastating impacts in another area. And we've certainly seen this in the context of the COVID pandemic, where biological hazard has had undue stress on food chains around the world. From a DRR perspective, we believe that achieving the resilience of food systems requires a far better understanding and management of systemic risk. And this for us is the starting point for managing risks and building resilience, including in food systems. So our challenge is to transform systems to not only be resilient to shocks themselves, but to proactively reduce risks and build resilience. And we know that this is more expensive and complicated than responding to food crises, but the alternatives are simply not acceptable. What we would really like to see is better integration of food systems into the global work that's being carried out on disaster risk management and resilience. And if I might just mention that the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction does take note of the importance of strengthened coherent policies to protect food security as a part of sustainable development. But I do believe that there are areas of work where we could really strengthen the integration of food systems into resilience building and into Sendai framework implementation. For example, right now there are more than 100 countries that have developed in the past years national disaster risk reduction strategies. But I do not believe that all of them actually mention food systems, resilience building, and reduction in risk to food systems as an integrated part of their national disaster risk management strategies. We tend to operate in silos, and therefore that's why we're really working on multi-hazard, multi-sectoral approaches to risk reduction. This is also true at the local level, where there's a tremendous effort underway to develop, to implement, to finance local resilience strategies. And I think it's quite important that those connections are made with those actors that are responsible for food systems as well. In addition, there is an important global effort underway right now to promote comprehensive disaster and climate risk management. And we just heard a few moments ago about the work underway with climate risk management. But really the attempt now is to have an integrated approach. We know that food systems are contributing heavily to climate change, and the impact of climate change is extremely important on the food systems. Hence this need for far more integrated approaches to managing climate and disaster risks. We would also like to see a greater focus on food systems in the context of the forthcoming COP26. Finally, there is a global momentum underway to improve understanding of risk, vulnerability, and exposure in humanitarian and developing contexts, so that we're better able to not only understand humanitarian needs, which can include obviously food security, but also to better understand, manage, and mitigate the risks that are driving some of the causes of fragility and driving up humanitarian needs. And we think that this joining of forces between humanitarian and development actors around risk management, for example, around scaling up anticipatory action, anticipatory financing, is a good opportunity to also address resilience in food systems. And maybe
Thank you, Loretta.
Okay, I'll leave
Any
it there.
closing
Very
words?
much.
Okay, thank you so much indeed, how we can build the bridge between humanitarian action, climate action, and disaster reduction. That's a key challenge for building resilience. We're now going to invite Dr. Liz Kimani. We're very privileged to have you on the call. Liz, are you with us? I don't know if I see her here. Yes, here you go. Liz, you're joining us from Kenya, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
You are a senior researcher working for the African Population and Health Research Center, and also a very well-respected lawyer. You've had several rewards, including you got the first Wellcome Trust Fellowship and also the Rockefeller Foundation Awards. So in your views, how can we also address this issue of universal food access, building upon this principle of Ubuntu. I think you have a story to share with us. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so maybe just as a background, just to say that I've been working a lot amongst the urban poor in Kenya, and recently a story of a mother cooking stones for her children hit the headlines, and this was shocking. But this is not an isolated case. Many people in Kenya and Africa and everywhere in the world actually sleep hungry. Like in Kenya, in urban poor settings, we have documented evidence that about 80% of households are food insecure, and about 50% of children are stunted. And this is because of the way the food system has been dehumanized. The food system is no longer resilient, and there has been a lot of, there is commodification of the food system, that people without money cannot, and if you don't have money, you don't have food, because food equals money. If you live, like, for example, in an urban area and you don't have money, you're not producing your own food, then you sleep hungry. And that is the case, that is the reality for many. And so what we are trying to do now is to try to change the narrative about food. We want to reconceptualize how, we want food to be reconceptualized. We want to change the narrative of how food is understood. We want food to be seen as a basic human need, as it is, a basic human right. And we want food to be decommodified and recommodified, so that we want to see food as a common good that people can even share. When I was growing up, we shared food, we grew food, and we did subsistence farming, and we shared food, and people around where I lived were not food insecure. But now food has been so commodified that even sharing of food is not a common occurrence. And so my team in Kenya have developed a vision for 2050, and we really want to create a different narrative about food. In this vision, we are promoting food resilience in the food system through promoting the spirit of Ubuntu, that is sharing of food. We want people to be comfortable sharing food. And we are also promoting local food for local use in urban areas. We know that by 2050, the world will be more urban than rural. If the trend that is now continues to 2050, so many people will be hungry. And so we are promoting local food production in the urban areas. We are supporting urban poor communities and other people in urban areas to be able to create kitchen gardens. And then, because some people may have bigger spaces to grow food and others very small, we are promoting, we want to have a food rescue system, so that food can be rescued from where it is in excess and redistributed to where it is needed, like to the urban poor. So ensuring less food loss and equity in the food system. And to speak about this universal food access, I'll be very happy to see these concepts of universal food access enacted, enacting food as a common good, enacting food as a human right, and also as a public good. And we really want to see this taken in many countries. We want to see the right to food constitutionalized in many constitutions in the world. And this concept of the commodification of food and really making food common good and a public good and a human right enacted in many of these countries. And so we have to realize that we cannot just rely on the market systems. We have to bring in other systems like the public provision of food and making the government accountable to really ensuring that people have access to food. And also having this concept of having the civic food as a common good and really empowering people to be able to have food as a common good and to share food, to have this collective approach of having food as a common good. So
thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing these sobering comments about poverty and the fact that so many people just can't afford having food on their plate. And also thank you for sharing your vision, a more positive vision of food as a common good and something that we all share in this spirit of Ubuntu. I see that your speech has been triggering a lot of interest and there are many questions in the chat. I would encourage people to type their questions directly to Elizabeth, if you don't mind, Elizabeth, to continue the conversation and maybe address some of these questions as well. Thank you so much. So we're now going to turn to Mr. Zitouni Oud Daba. I hope I am pronouncing your name well. You are joining from the Food and Agriculture Organization. And you're going to talk about the third action area, which is very important for us for resilience, which is about climate resilient development pathways. So can you tell us about that from the FAO perspective?
Well, thank you, Elise, and greetings everyone joining us on this dialogue. And thank you, Sandrine and Salim Al-Haq as well, and the whole team really involved in this for coming this far. I mean, this is obviously an extremely difficult and challenging task, given the number of requests and rather the number of proposals made, and to bring it down to this small number of solutions is really very much appreciative. I want to share with you my perspective on this and in relation to the proposed game-changing solutions. And since we're talking about the game-changing solutions and the change we would like to make, given all the challenges that we've been talking about, I just want to highlight really two things in my intervention. The first one, which is to bring us down to the reality and to understand, you know, why do we need to act and where. And here I want to highlight the point of starting with those who are actually most affected. If we really want to implement these game-changing solutions, we want to make the change, then we have to give priority to those most affected. So let me cite an example. There are around the world about 500 million of smallholder farmers, and they're highly dependent, as many people know, on natural resources and agriculture, and they're particularly vulnerable to climate change. And 98% of the world agricultural holdings are less than 10 hectares. They're about 10 hectares or less. And almost all of these small farms are in developing countries where they support around 2 billion people. And if you take the example of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, there are about 80% of the farmland that is cultivated by smallholder farmers. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that when we talk about building resilience, I think we have to start with these most affected ones and give them the priority. This is my first point. My second point is when we look at all the game-changing solutions that we collected, and I think you heard about the clusters and then we have sub-clusters. My second point, I think if we want to make this change, then we really have to be brave and bold. What I mean by that is I think we need to look beyond the clusters, beyond the sub-clusters, and see what we can put together that is really going to be game changing. And I'll give you an example. Most of you must have heard about the One Health approach. Now, if you look back and think, well, we had a cluster on environment, we had a cluster on animals, we had a cluster on human health, and we could have treated them like that. But by thinking beyond that and say, well, how can we work to deliver multiple benefits? And then you create a one something approach, then we can deliver really a maximum impact and maximum benefits. So these are the 2 points really I wanted to highlight with regard to climate change and food systems as an example, and to focus on how can we actually really make the difference. So for me, it's really to look beyond these clusters and subclusters, is to reverse them in a sense, instead of going to, cutting down into the little detail, actually to start look again and say, well, okay, to implement these, what can we create that can make things stronger? And I would be happy, and we don't have time now, obviously, I would be happy, and I'm really very pleased to be part of this. And thank you very much for the invitation. So we can really brainstorm and think outside the box and see what we can actually create that's going to make a difference. There are things that exist and they work and we can scale them up, but we can also create new things to be, creative and innovative. And on innovation, I would like that really to be part of the solution, because innovation is powerful and we really need to harness the power of innovation in the broader sense, not just in terms of hard technology, but soft technology and soft approach in terms of knowledge of smallholder farmers and indigenous peoples and communities. So I'll stop it here since we don't have time, and I just want to share this perspective, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for these really valuable insights indeed, starting with the most vulnerable. I'm sure that Salim and also Christine from Action Track 4 would agree with you on that. Also looking at the One Health approach and social innovation, or soft innovation, as you call it, to build stronger resilience. Thank you for sharing your views on that. We also would like to hear from Mr. Motsomi Malejain, who is joining us from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. If you could also reflect on what you've heard in terms of how we can build climate resilient development pathways. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elise. And first of all, thank you for the UNFSS Secretariat and colleagues for inviting us to this important work. We are very happy to be part of this indeed. Actually, when it comes to climate change adaptation, or at least to climate change, food is everything actually in the context of the UNFCCC. Increasingly, I think in many of the national plans and documents for countries, food systems or agriculture and food systems prominently occupy the priority list when we talk about the nationally determined contributions, the national adaptation plans, and prior to that, even before. And this also goes within the support for these areas when we start to look at the programs that are being supported through the Green Climate Fund, through the financial mechanisms of the convention, including the Least Developed Countries Fund. And of course, another important thing is that what we need not forget is that food is connected to many other systems, so which actually provides opportunities to see how we can then create this systems approach, integrative approaches on how we can address the whole system as a whole. What we are doing in the UNFCCC, I think what is also exciting for us in being part of this process, where we see a lot of leverage, is that we have several areas that we can contribute with, and also that we will also learn from the UNFCCC summit and the outcomes that can enrich these. We have a collective process, a collective intelligence process for promoting a paradigm shift in human-nature interface for sustainable development. We call it the Resilience Frontiers. And under that, one of the pathways that we are actually pursuing related to food is mainstreaming regenerative food production systems aimed at adding rather than subtracting value to nature as we produce and consume food. Indeed, under that, we also recognize that food systems are an important medium to reconnect human with nature. And as initially also introduced at earlier beginning, this decade for ecosystems actually presents us these opportunities to bring it back and reconcile everything. And also increasingly what we are seeing also actually in terms of the countries, or at least the governments, what they're coming up with, there's a range of nice solutions. And I think this manifests itself to already even the game-changing solutions that we have now. The response from what Dr. Salim also presented at the beginning, that the feedback and the inputs have been very rich, and there are solutions out there. I think it's then to identify which are the best ones that can lead us to improving our agriculture productivity, using the latest technologies that we have and other approaches, of course, how we can establish food reserves, especially in terms of risks or shocks that, as also Zituni mentioned, importantly, the most vulnerable systems, I think the food systems also get impacted very well. And investing in agro infrastructure systems, food risk transfer, and so on. And pushing, we are also having the processes on pushing the boundaries beyond to improve knowledge sharing. For example, under the Nairobi work program that we have in the UNFCCC. I also did mention, of course, the national adaptation plans, which are the main instrument for adaptation planning. So we see a lot of benefits and synergy with these. And what we are also looking at is that how can government, or how can we learn from the solutions that would emerge from here, and how can we promote them through implementation of the action within the UNFCCC context. And of course, also vice versa. I mean, how can the UNFCCC process contribute to that? So we are also keen to see the solutions that are coming up, looking at those in conjunction with what we already have and the governments are having, and seeing what are the gaps and how we can improve all that, and then build from there and then from there. So thank you very much, Elisa, for this opportunity.
Thank you, thank you. We have a couple of minutes to take a few questions from participants. I see there is a question from Malika Bunto. If you could ask your question and also say which speaker you would like to address. So over to you, Malika.
I think it must have been like some kind of manipulation, a mistake.
Ah, okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
All right, no worries. Anyone else would like to ask a question? There's been a lot of discussion in the chat as well. I see there is someone here from UNCDF. No, I know it's always a little bit intimidating to ask questions with 78 participants on the call. So maybe we'll move on to the next part for now until you warm up for the next session, the next round of questions.
Elise, before you start the next part, just to quickly scan so that you can also bring this into the conversation with the other wonderful action track leads. Mm-hmm. There's a question here that I think is really important that we need to think about around displaced people and also refugees. I'm sure that Lawrence will also look at the hunger issue, but this is something that I think we should give some consideration to, and absolutely has been included in some of the second wave of solutions. So one thing that we haven't maybe mentioned enough is that clearly the resilience track is also looking at conflict zones and fragile zones with regard to resilience, and those that are most vulnerable and most impacted within those zones.
Thank you, Sandrine. I don't know if Mr. Zituni Dada, you would like to add something to that, in particular on focusing on the most vulnerable people, and this is including the displaced population.
I think to save time, I answered the question that was provided, and we'll continue doing that exchange. But I think that the point I made is sufficient.
Okay, thank you. There is a question here from Shirin Sayed Damze. Let's see, I hope the sound will work. Over to you. If you can say who you are and where you are based. I'm just trying to make it as open as possible, but maybe the technology is not helping us with the connection. So maybe we'll move on to the next part for now. Sandrine Dixon-De Clève, who is the Action Track 5 co-lead and also the co-president of the Club of Rome, is going to set the context in terms of how the various action tracks are working together and how resilience is actually connected to all the other topics. So Sandrine, over to you to introduce the next session.
Yeah, I just want to thank the co-leads that are here with us and to say a few things. First of all, as I introduce my wonderful co-leads and also on behalf of myself and Salim. The first is that we started this journey in the autumn and we were indicated that we would be co-leads or leads of particular action tracks. And several of you actually in the chat have said, hold on, isn't this a siloed approach? Even within Action Track 5, if you think that Action Track 5 had a siloed approach, we had even a more siloed approach between the different action tracks. And from the beginning, when we came together, we all realized that, hold on, we were talking about a system. We're talking about the food system. And we all need to be part of that system. And we all bring different valuable contributions, also solutions. But we also realized that we needed to cross-fertilize, that actually many of the solutions that were coming in from member states and that were coming in from different individuals were being sent to several of the different action tracks. And that by working together, we started to really look at resilience across the system. That yes, we are the resilience track, but that we need the other action tracks within this discussion to really underpin what resilience is. So I just would love to introduce, and I'll start with Lawrence. He's Action Track 1, so he always gets to go first.
Actually, Sandrine, I think we're also going to ask Ismahan to share. It's also about the context, but more about the scientific context. I think Ismahan also has a few slides to share on resilience and science before we do a deep dive into the various action tracks. So Ismahan, over to you. And I think by now, Jose Luis should be able to share the slides as well.
Apologies, Ismahan, because you are such an important part of our team. So absolutely wonderful that you are with us.
Thank you very much, Elise. Thank you, Sandrine. So I'm just giving few definition and a bit of putting what resilience mean to make it a bit more accessible and to make sure that we are talking about the same things. So I'm presenting a few slides from the paper, the resilience paper that was co-authored by Dr. Thomas Hertel, Dr. Morakot Tanti Sharouen, Dr. Frank Ewert, and myself. And really, we try to define what resilience is based on the evidence that we have, based on the analysis that we were able to do, particularly looking at really very high ranking peer-reviewed documents. And really what we want to present here is that really resilience have 5 distinct capacities. First thing, to anticipate what's going to happen, to prevent it, to absorb it, to adapt to an evolving risk, and to transform in case we need a transformation, in case that we realize that the food system is not working anymore. And the resilience have also 3 main areas or 3 main components. It has to encompass an economic resilience, a social resilience, and ecological resilience. And before I move to the next slide, what I want to say here is that the basis of conflict issues, it's a lot in inequalities and poverty. And we need really to give that attention. We need due attention to inequalities. We need due attention to poverty, because without minimizing inequalities and eradicating poverty, we will have always conflict, and we will have always very unstable and non-resilient systems. Of course, Action Track 5 has a lot of commonalities with other action track, and I think that Sandrine covered it very well. Next slide, please, Jose Luis. So, Jose Luis, can I have the next slide, please? Okay. So what I want to say here is that really that resilience, when we look at resilience, we have to look at the context, and we have to look as well at the key trade-off. The trade-offs are very important. because there is no win-wins. I mean, there is win-wins, but there is a lot of things that you have to choose one against another. A social against an environmental, or an environmental solution against an economical. So building resilience requires really a clear understanding and consideration of the specific food system context, be it a region, be it a time period, system complexity, the actors, the institutions that are part of it. And it needs also that we need to look at the 5 capacities of the resilient food system that I mentioned, which include anticipation, adaptation, and transformation. In terms of key traits of that really are very important for us to keep in mind as we are designing the new food system, it's really the dichotomy between humanitarian and long-term development assistance, the dichotomy that we have as well, that we need more nutritious food, particularly for very young kids. We have still about 2 billion people that are not eating to develop to their potential, and the livestock protection that has some environmental impact. We have to look at the mitigation and the adaptation of the climate change, the urban and rural communities, the global versus self-sufficiency. So there is a number of trade-offs that we need really to be very recognizing them, understanding them, and designing a system that will minimize particularly the impact on vulnerable communities. Next, please, Jose. So all these trade-offs became more pronounced in certain circumstances, particularly marginal environment, particularly marginalized people, particularly marginalized communities. And to address these resilient challenges, solution needs to be defined around cross-cutting levers and joined up policy reform, coordinated investment, accessible financing, innovation, traditional knowledge, governance, data, evidence, and empowerment. It has to be really inclusive and bring in all actors and all stakeholders, and not leave any facet empty, because without the full system being responsive to it and being addressed, we won't get to the impact that we are striving to. Next slide, please, Jose Luis. Here I want to just mention the contextuality. And oh no, here I want to really mention some of the main solution, and there are many of them. Because the problem is big, there is no silver bullet, there is no one size fit all. There are a number of them, and we need really to develop them in parallel. So of course, early warning systems are very important when we talk about environmental resilience, social protection, enhanced equity in the food system, you name it. So, but really it's a series of solutions. I know that we are trying to boil in them to only few, but the reality of the things is that we need a diverse portfolio of solutions. And those diverse portfolio of solutions will fit certain regions, certain ecosystem, certain communities, and certain circumstances. Next, please, Jose Luis, and I think that's my last slide.
Thank you. Which
is mainly just to make sure that, to draw your attention that the operationalization of the resilience context, the resilience concept, it's very important to keep it in context. It's very important to keep it local, national, international, have all these aspects in place. And there is no single game-changing solution that will ensure resilience across multiple food security challenges. Instead, we need really to adopt a system approach to resilience, and we need really to keep in mind, for me, resilience, it's economic resilience, it's social resilience, which is super duper important, and environmental resilience. If we can move the three in parallel, we could eventually say that we save it in 2021 and we developed a resilient food system. Over to you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ismahan, for your really inspiring leadership and for being a champion, a world champion for food systems. If you have questions for Ismahan, please do share in the chat. I think this is the safest way of sharing comments and questions, given the very large number of participants today. And we have another champion here on the call with us, who is Laurent Saddadz. I'm sure many people know you, Laurence. You are the Executive Director of GAIN. and you've been awarded the World Food Prize in 2018, and you have many multiple achievements, and you've been really dedicating your life to food, and in particular to nutrition for children. So we'd like to hear from you now on how do you see this connection between resilience and what Action Track 1 is doing, as you are the co-chair of Action Track 1. For all of you, just as a reminder, the goal is to ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all. So please, over to you.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you, Sandrine and Celine, for inviting me to be a part of this. And it's really nice to do this, and it's not a chore, it's a delight, because we're all working together in the action tracks. I've got 5 minutes, Elise, is that correct? So I'm going to, rather than give you abstract connections with resilience, and Ismail, those 5 dimensions are really helpful. Rather than give you abstract connections, I'm going to tell you very quickly about 8 different game changers that I think have really important resilience components to them. So the first one is a Zero Hunger Fund, but we're asking big corporates to contribute to Zero Hunger. Many of them have done really well in the last 12 months. The S&P 500 has gone up by 50% in value over the last 12 months. The NASDAQ has gone up by 64% in the last 12 months. And governments and donors are really strapped for cash. So the idea is that these big corporates should contribute some funding towards a ending hunger fund, which is modeled after the Ceres 2030. And the really nice thing about this is the investment they put in will generate business opportunities for smallholder businesses in SMEs and smallholder businesses in the countries in which hunger is the most chronic and acute. So there's a nice flow from big corporations investing in efforts to end hunger, which create private sector opportunities for local smallholder and SMEs. And that's all about prevention. Prevention now, because we know in a year's time or 2 years' time, the hunger numbers are going to be 100 million, 200 million higher than they are now. So if you think it's going to be painful now, it's going to be much more painful in a year's time. So that's the first one. Second one is around production diversity. One of our game changers is really working on underutilized nutritious crops. It's kind of crazy that we have 12 crops and five animals that are responsible for 75% of all the food we consume. That's a recipe for fragility and non-resilience. So how do we diversify the amounts, the types of foods that we have to make them attractive, affordable, and nutritious? The third one is around cool chains. We're doing a really interesting piece of work with the Cool Coalition, which is a whole group of organizations that are working actually across all the major events in 2021. And they've come up with a circular system of cold chain boxes that can be multi-use. So you can use them for COVID vaccines, and you can also use them for fresh food, so preventing food loss and food waste. You can have them at the community level, so they don't exclude smallholders, and you can use them you can use them with solar panels. They're clean energy cool chain boxes. That's very exciting. Third one is around small and medium enterprises in the workforce, in the food system, and the people that work in those small and medium enterprises. COVID has kind of taken a wrecking ball to food systems. People who work in the small and medium enterprises and on the farm are often on the front lines. If they get sick, everything goes down the tubes for their families, for themselves, but also for the communities and the markets they serve. So one of the game changers is around getting finance to smallholders in the food system. How do we do that better? And another game changer is around how do we get food to frontline food system workers in the SME smallholder sector, in this small sector. The partners there are the African Development Bank on the SME side and the Consumer Goods Forum, which is a collection of big companies who serve value, who draw on value chains in Africa and Asia. The next one is about social protection. How do we make social protection? Social protection has increased its coverage massively during the COVID era. It went from 0.6 of 1 billion to 1.8 billion people covered. But how do we stop that going back down again once COVID ebbs away? Of course, it's ebbing and flowing, but once it ebbs away, how can we make sure that the number of people invested and being helped by social protection can stay? And how can we make sure the social protection is a hand up, not just a handout? In other words, we can convert the cash into assets, into businesses, into good nutrition for young children. So that's one we're working closely with Action Track 5 on, actually. There's another one around wasting. This is under 5 children. Under 5 children are really poorly served by the global infrastructure right now, the global architecture. The world is split. They are the victim of this split between the humanitarian space and the development space. All the people who think wasting should be a treatment set of interventions are in the humanitarian space, and the people who think it should be mostly prevention are in the development space. It's not a perfect match, but that's the rough split. And of course, because those two worlds never really connect very well, young children are being ill-served. And so we're trying to do a reset, a global reset on wasting that brings the prevention and the development people together. And that really plays to the anticipate and prevent modes that Ismail mentioned. We're also working a lot on food safety. And in COVID, again, COVID has caused lots of food markets to shut down, because especially wet food markets with live animals and fresh food, because of lack of protocols. It's a classic inability to anticipate, one of Ismail's 5 categories. So we're working on how to make informal markets and food systems safer. Most of the food safety work that's gone on is for food for export and food for formal food systems. Not much is for informal food systems for domestic consumption. So we're trying to change that. Thank you so much,
Laurence.
My final point is on data. My final point's on data. We're trying to get all food system data together in one place, because data is the ultimate currency for prevention and guidance. Thank you.
Many thanks to you. It's really crystal clear, and thanks for giving us a glimpse into the game-changing solutions you're working on. For all of you, this is also to say that the UN Food System Summit will be a springboard for implementation of these solutions. And we're really hoping that there will be very large coalitions that will be built around these solutions for implementations also after the summit. So now we'd like to hear from Lana Weidgenant from Action Track 2, focusing on sustainable consumption. And we would love to hear from you also on the connection between sustainable consumption and resilience. Lana, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
You as well. So it's a pleasure to be here today, joining on behalf of Action Track 2, which, as mentioned, is the Shifting to Sustainable Consumption Patterns Action Track. As you might be able to tell, I'm not Gunhild, so I'm actually the Youth Vice Chair of the Action Track, and I work alongside the Chair, Gunhild Stordalen, and my fellow Vice Chair, Ajay Veer-Jakar, to bring progress forward on the shift to sustainable consumption. In Action Track 2, we are moving forward and working more closely with the other action tracks in this integration process, while having these 2 particular action areas under our main focus, as has been mentioned: enabling, inspiring, and motivating people to enjoy healthy and sustainable options, and also slashing food loss and waste and transitioning to a circular economy. Hosted under these areas is the solution proposition of school food, which has also come out as a game-changing solution proposition in Action Track 5, and on which we will be working together with Action Track 5 team members to move forward. There are even co-leads of our action areas coming from Action Track 5, and the same for Action Track 2, in bringing those different perspectives to each of our teams. But I want to take a step back to the bigger picture, as between the topics of shifting to more sustainable consumption and of food systems resilience, there is significant intersection. After all, the science is clear that current food consumption, especially in high-income countries, is unsustainable, and the largest detriment is being made to biodiversity, to deforestation, to climate resilience, and to land use. Even with more sustainable food production, the land use issue will not allow for resilient food systems, which is why UN-backed studies support the shift to more plant-based consumption in line with more sustainable production, such as agroecology and more regenerative methods. And speaking of food production, consumer demand and desire for unsustainable consumption patterns, such as meat-heavy appetites in the US and Europe, are actually fueling unsustainable production methods that we are seeing, such as the burning of the Amazon rainforest happening for meat to export to high-income countries for that consumption, and also the factory farms that we see in high-income countries and around the world as well. With factory farms and industrial food animal production, this is important to touch on because scientists have been warning for years that a pandemic like COVID-19 was sure to come due to the conditions of animals raised for food being fed antibiotics in order to be raised in extremely crowded, unsanitary, and anti-animal welfare conditions, which have also been fostering dangerous antimicrobial resistance. As we also talk about often in Action Track 2, unsustainable consumption is also non-climate friendly consumption. Current diets will not allow us to remain within the 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius global temperature increase that we need to stay within. And that means that we'll likely face dangerous climate change impacts. So we need the shift to sustainable food consumption for food systems resilience. And I'm excited to have our teams coming together more in the coming weeks to address these intersections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lana. We're very, very happy to also get a youth perspective on this topic. And thank you for raising this very important issue of industrial food production and the need to shift to more sustainable consumption. We're now going to hear from Mr. Joao Campri from WWF International, who is joining us from Brazil, I believe. And Joao, you have been leading on Action Track 3, focusing on nature positive production, which is a very, very important topic for resilience as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Elise. Delighted to see you. And thank you, Celine and Sandrine. Look, congratulations, first of all, for this great event. And thanks for having me here to say a few words about how we are integrating the works of Action Track, all Action Tracks. So in Action Track 3, we depart from the premise that our job is to resolve 3 interconnected crises, right? First is biodiversity loss, second, climate change, and third, food insecurity, all of which, if not resolved together, will further compromise our ability to develop measures that enhance resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. And the way that we produce food today not only reinforces this triple challenge, but actually stands between where we are today and the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we only have 9 years, ahead of us to deliver the SDGs. So there is not much time at all. So let me share with you now 5 solution clusters that will help accelerate action and put food systems on a nature positive and a people positive track to deliver the SDGs. So cluster number 1, the main message from this cluster is deforest less and restore more, right? We must eliminate deforestation and conversion of natural ecosystems from food and feed supply chains and invest heavily on soil conservation and rehabilitation of degraded or degrading ecosystems. This will work to enhance resilience as well. The solution cluster number 2 that I'd like to share that is very important for this dialogue, this conversation, this event, is to scale out agroecology. We have an action area entirely dedicated to improving production systems. And this action area is co-led by leadership team members of Actions Track 3, 4, and 5. And here in this action area, we have an explicit solution cluster on agroecology co-led by all action tracks. This cluster is fully anchored on the principles of agroecology. Although there is strong evidence to support these approaches, I have been hearing from our Action Track 3 community that we need to significantly redirect research attention to better understand the potential of agroecological models to reach scale. And we also, I have also been hearing that we need to significantly redirect agri-food support like subsidies to enable farmers and fishers everywhere to adopt such approaches. These approaches are inclusive, they irradiate ecosystem services and other public goods, enhance resilience, and therefore should be properly financed and prioritized. The solutions that are emerging in the third cluster is to promote agrobiodiversity. We know that today 75% of human calories come from 12 plants and 5 animals, and global supply chains are organized around those few items, if you will, these few species. This puts huge pressures on natural ecosystems by stimulating deforestation, stimulating conversion of nature due to monocrops. And in many places, this distresses the fair access to land and natural resources that are important for the resilience of communities. Not to mention the impacts that such limited food choices have on human health. So we are working across action tracks to move beyond these 12 plants and 5 animals, promote agrobiodiversity, recognize the value that these forgotten, quote unquote, forgotten foods can play on diversifying diets and doing good for nature and people.
Thank you.
Solution cluster number 4 is to strengthen the role of blue food. Oceans and inland waters are the next frontier in the supply of protein. So we need to pay close attention to them across action tracks. And we have formed a really robust solution cluster on that. The 5th and last cluster that I'd like to share with you that is very important for this dialogue is the need to strengthen indigenous peoples' food systems, promote an inclusive model. And we have solutions that promote an inclusive model of conservation led by indigenous peoples based on their knowledge and their food systems, and applying an adequate blending of new technologies with ancestral knowledge. Finally, Elise, Salim, and Sandrine, we need to connect the Food System Summit to all other UN conferences. You know, the food system is at the heart of many issues that is challenging us today, including the delivery of the SDGs, like I mentioned at the beginning. And we can't fix the food system by proposing to phase out of food, like we're doing with the fossil fuels, right? So we need to transform the system from within, so it can work for nature and work for people and not against them. And we can only do this by the synergistic endeavors that we're making across our action tracks. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion after this.
Thank you so much, obrigado. And I know that all of us have been very pleased to be working with you between Action Track 5 and Action Track 3. There's been a lot of collaboration. Now we'd like to hear from Christine Campo, who is the chair of Action Track 4, working on equity and livelihoods. Over to you, Christine.
Thanks for that.
2 minutes or 2.
Yeah, I'll be short. As Itino from FAO and others have rightly said, small-scale food producers and fisher folks are the most underpaid, poorly protected, and exploited people around the world. They have no social protection, no access to healthcare, no stable incomes to provide for themselves and their families. And the Action Track 4 is about livelihoods. We're looking across food systems, everybody from the field and the water to the markets, to the urban food stalls, to the supermarket shelves. They're the seasonal and migrant workers who leave their own homes to work the lands of somebody else in a different country. The pandemic exposed how vulnerable these people are. It was just a few months ago that they estimated over half the world's 3.3 global workforce were at risk of losing their livelihoods. Borders were closed, trade was restricted, confinement measures prevented people from accessing markets. They had no way to buy their inputs, to sell their produce. People lost their incomes and several returned home to their villages. And the pandemic aside, there's the routine challenges of climate change and conflict. What happens when farmers when the rains come too soon, too much, too late, too few? What insurances do we have in place when crops fail? And how do these people provide for themselves and prepare for the next season? So that's why we're working so closely with Action Track 5 on these issues. On concrete examples of how we're working together, we just heard from Action Track 4 on agroecology. We definitely heard from Action Track 1 on finance to smallholders and also food to frontline workers in the SME sector. Super important ways that we're working together. With Action Track 5, I can say that we just received a proposition for Wave 2 on promoting the development of mobile enabled insurance products against natural disasters for small scale farmers. There is a vast opportunity for mobile network operators to be using mobile technology to register, locate farms, to use mobile money to collect premiums and pay out claims. So thanks for your time. I know time is short, but just wanted to, there's so many great ideas out there that we want to lift up and scale out. So we're so happy to be working across action tracks to be able to do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this very positive and optimistic outlook. Before we move on to the next session, Sandrine and Salib, any reflection you would like to share on what you've heard from your action track colleagues and co-chairs?
No, in the interest of
next...
time, I'll keep it short, but I just wanted to thank them all again for their time and energy, and again, the cross-fertilization. I mean, you've just heard that some of the solutions that are coming in will be again brought to the different action tracks, because they will find different places in the different clusters that we have. So thanks to all of them. And maybe just the last key point though, Elise, is that several people have been asking, you know, is there a wave 3? Do we still have possibilities to send in solutions? We've had to stop because we've gotten so many, but clearly if there are truly important solutions, and we want to be transparent and not leave anyone out, then you know, do please send them our way, and we will speak about this with the other action track leads. This is, and myself and Salim keep on saying it, an open process, and it does not end with either the pre-summit or the summit itself. It will continue. This is all about not only building coalitions amongst ourselves, but definitely with all of you so that we actually have an impact.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. And now we're going to turn to the last part of this forum, which is a roundtable with member states. So quite an important part. Of course, member states are at the heart of the UN system. They are also at the center of this summit because the member states are actually also the anchoring partners for building coalitions for implementing all of these solutions. So we're very privileged to have with us His Excellency Shamim Hassan, who is the ambassador from Bangladesh. And we would like to hear from you in terms of what you're doing back home to champion resilience of food systems, how you raise ambition, and also how you're planning to connect your activities with the UN Food System Summit, but also with COP26 and the CBD dialogues to catalyze food systems transformation. So over to you, His Excellency.
Thank you. Distinguished co-chairs of Action Track 5, Dr. Salim El-Haq and Ms. Sandrine Dixon-DeClave, Ms. Valerie Guarnier, Assistant Executive Director, WFP, distinguished colleagues from other agencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm honored to be present at this public forum of Action Track 5, Build Resilience to Vulnerabilities, Shocks, and Stress. I sincerely thank the organizers for inviting me to this August forum. I was listening to the very rich interventions by the speakers and discussions from the floor with lots of interest. It enlightened me very much with the theme, action areas and game-changing solutions. The center of all discussions lies with inclusiveness, meaning to connect with the people, to understand their views and take cognizance of their indigenous solutions. I respectfully acknowledge Action Track teams for the due diligence in gaining wide-ranging views, not only from the member states, but also from the civil society, private sectors, youths, and most importantly, from the vulnerable groups, those who are quite often hurt by the policymakers, thus make the summit a real people summit and solution summit. Bangladesh officially aligns itself to take part in Action Track 1, and accordingly, the country is organizing dialogues at the regional level and national level. Bangladesh is one of the few countries to organize the first national dialogue during January 2021. We are in the process of closing the dialogues in May 2021, and will share the outcomes to the FSS Secretariat. With that, I would like to encourage all to join the discussions particularly listen to the voice of the small-scale marginal farmers around the globe and their homegrown solutions. We need to reaffirm our solidarity with mutual cooperation and need to follow an inclusive approach to improve our food system that will help us to build back better from the setbacks of the COVID-19 pandemic, in the words of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Dear participants, let me share with you that I, personally and of course, representing my country as ambassador here in Italy, I take immense interest to join the events on resilience. This agenda is very close to our heart and part of our development journey. Bangladesh is one of the world's most vulnerable countries to climate change. Just 1 degree centigrade increase of global temperature and consequent sea level rise will result in inundation of a large area of Bangladesh and thus displacement of 40 million people by the end of this century. Around 2% of our GDP is regularly lost due to natural calamities and environmental degradation. Climate change-induced salinity and other disasters are harming our rice and other crop production significantly. In fighting against climate change, Bangladesh has emerged as a global leader for the homegrown tools and strategies, including adaptation measures. In fact, we are very often mentioned as a role model in adaptation. The beginning of January 2019 witnessed Bangladesh taking necessary steps to become a climate resilient country by 2030 by achieving transformational adaptation to climate change impacts. Former UN Secretary General Mr. Ban Ki-moon said that, quote unquote, Bangladesh is the best teacher in climate adaptation, unquote. The vibrancy and resilience of the people of Bangladesh had been always an energetic force for the country to move on despite numerous challenges. Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, is the chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, CVF, and we would like to offer the interest of the climatically vulnerable countries. This is very important when we are discussing the transformation of the food system, because there is no such single solution that can fit all. The solutions must be homegrown, accessible and affordable, especially by the LDCs. In this connection, I would like to flag one important issue before the enlightened audience. I carefully reviewed the presentation of the 85 that was delivered in the group of friends for the Food System Summit here in Rome. While reviewing the mapping solutions of the subclusters, I found most of the comments from the developed countries. To that effect, we need to dedicate our effort to listen to the voices of the LDCs from the Africa region and Asia region.
Thank you so much.
But not the least, I'm finishing within half a minute. While keeping our focus on Food System Summit, we should also generate or continue our discussion from the pre-summit, try to feed in our shortlisted solutions, thus making it more inclusive and forward-looking. With these words, Bangladesh reiterates its commitment to participate actively in the preparatory process, UN Food System Summit and pre-summit in 2021, and in doing so, we assure our fullest support in the coming days. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for these comments, and also congratulations for hosting one of the first few national dialogues. And now we'd like to hear from His Excellency Dr. Satyendra Prasad. You are the permanent representative of Fiji to the UN. So over to you. If you can keep your remarks to 3 to 4 minutes max, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, I will try. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to share some remarks. I will be brief, and I will send the Secretariat my written remarks, if you can share, please. So let me make a few comments on behalf of the Fiji and the Pacific Islands, on whose behalf I'm making these comments. One, that the Pacific Islands have an outsized and disproportionate contribution to global food security as contributors of some 30% of the world's tuna that is consumed, for example. And at the other end, there's a sense of unfairness about it, the returns to the Pacific from that global food supply is less than 2% of the price of tuna. And so there's lots of issues in between that we hope we can pay more attention to. But there's another side to the blue food tuna, for example, that is linked to climate change and the migration from the Pacific Islands of tuna eastwards to cooler waters as the sea level temperatures rise. The loss to the Pacific is almost equal to the total ODA that is coming into the Pacific as small island developing states. How is it? And we'd really like a lot more reflection and discussion on the climate change and food security and food insecurity, as well as the climate justice aspects of this. In the Food System Summit, the Pacific Islands would also be looking forward to sharing some of the unique efforts, great efforts and strides that they're taking to build food resilience in response to climate change, with value chain addition, new productions of cacao, vanilla, coffee, and several other products that are more climate resistant, that can withstand more frequent rains and more intense rains, longer periods of droughts. And there's considerable play between science, research, industry, and government and the farming community. And we'd really like to share some of these lessons. But at the same time, I must say that in the current COVID-induced disruptions, some of these industries have also been adversely impacted. I will also make a comment about women and food security and food systems. Coastal fisheries in many of the countries have been degraded because of climate change, human action, etc. This disproportionately has impacted on women across the fisheries sector. And we need to pay a lot more attention to the role of women in food production, in agriculture, in blue foods, as well as the enhanced and elevated insecurities that women experience as a combination of, given the combination of factors. My two last points. One is the unique within the Pacific Islands. All the smaller states are uniquely challenged and facing enhanced food insecurity, but some states are much more intensely, and these are the coral atoll states, which are barely 1 or 2 meters above sea level, and they face considerable degradation of the small amounts of lands that they had for agriculture to start off with. In the Melanesian states, saltwater intrusion, etc., have harmed the coastal areas, which are where agricultural food production has taken place. So the sea level and its impact on agriculture and food security is considerable. To the Food System Summit, we are looking for solutions. We are looking to share our own good experiences. We are looking for practical ideas. But most of all, we are looking for ideas that are capable of implementation to enhance food security and build resilience across the Pacific, and also that are also able to demonstrate impact across our societies in short periods of time. I thank you very much for inviting me to make this contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, His Excellency, for sharing these insights. And indeed, both Bangladesh and Fiji are at the forefront of climate change impacts. And it's really inspiring to see how your countries have been championing climate action and also food systems resilience. So thank you for your leadership. And we're now going to hear from Dr. Musunda Mumba. She's not representing a member state, but she is also a food systems champion. And Musunda is now working for UNDP. She's leading a very important initiative for development in Africa. So if you could share a few insights and reflection also on what you've heard from Fiji and Bangladesh, 2 to 3 minutes, if you can. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. I'm actually the director for the Rome Center for Sustainable Development, which is a global center, even though the focus is actually on Africa. I mean, listening on to, of course, I don't come from an island state. I was born in Zambia, next to Congo DRC, former Zaire, in the middle of the Congo rainforest. So my memory of growing up in a rural area is the proximity to forests, to mushrooms, wild mushrooms during the rainy season, fruit coming, you know, from different parts of the region and coming to the market. When I go back and take my children there, who are 9 and 6, some of these fruits have disappeared. I was listening to Ismahane, who, when she was talking about the relevance of social and ecological resilience, but also economic resilience. Zambia, where I was born, with the proximity to Congo DRC, where there was war and has been war and there's been instability, we saw the challenges of just transporting food. And fast forward in just less than 50 years of my life, we see these challenges in the middle of this pandemic and what this pandemic has done in just the movement and mobility, but also, more importantly, the absence of nutritious foods. So I think for me, in listening into the conversations, and also from the excellency from Bangladesh and also from the small island state Fiji, I see the point and the importance that ultimately, whether we like it or not, at the center of our food systems conversation are people. And also we have to remember that we have entered the future, that future that we foresaw either in movies, you know, talking about pandemics. So far, first, the future is here. So how then do we create an element of understanding these complexities and create agency, particularly in communities and women? And it's this agency that also led me to actually set up or found the Network of African Women Environmentalists, because I always used to see very many numbers being thrown. 60% of women in Africa are doing, but what do these women look like? In just about a month, we're going to be, as the United Nations and United Nations system is going to be launching the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. What does that mean for food systems? What are we restoring, but what is it that we need to conserve? So for me, I think the important thing, as was mentioned, this element of resilience at local, national, and international levels are very, very critical. And lastly, but not the least, I think I just want to mention the element of literacy. That element of literacy and conversations, all regions, global north and global south, have to learn from each other. Now we're finding baobab powder in all the health stores in Europe and other parts of the world. These are things that we just walk past as a child, but it's a superfood that's helping cancer patients, helping people, and building that resilience. So let's talk about this global network and global system that we're all part of, and also why these ecosystems are very much important even for human resilience. So thank you so much for inviting me. Over to you, Elise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Musunda, and very, very good actually to connect the dots also between food, climate, and nature, and to make these very important points around women leadership and youth empowerment and literacy. So our last speaker is now Dr. Elizabeth Kirk, who is a senior advisor working for the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office at the United Kingdom. So Liz, we would love to hear from you as well on how you see the role of the UK and the Commonwealth to support food systems resilience around the world. This is definitely a top priority for Action Track 5, to work with small island development states, but also the most vulnerable climate vulnerable countries. So we would love to hear from you on what the UK is doing, but also what the Commonwealth is doing. Also because this year, as all of you know, the UK has the COP26 presidency, and Salim and Sandrine have been working very hard with the COP26 climate champions to build a bridge between the UN Food System Summit and COP26. So Liz, over to you, if you are here. I don't see you here on the screen. Maybe there is a connection issue. If that is the case, we will need to keep Liz for our next open forum. And so in that case, I would like to invite Mike Kunga, the youth lead for Action Track 5, to share some reflection on this open forum, on what you've heard from a youth perspective, and also a few words about next steps on what will happen between now and the summit, and how you see the role of youth in this process. So Mike, are you with us? I hope the connection.
Yes, Elise, yes. Yeah, unfortunately I will not put my camera on, but I will share some few words.
We can hear you very well, so that's good. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks so much. So yes, listening to the conversation, I think it has been amazing to hear from the excellencies and the panelists on our list. So I'll focus on the youth, as you have said. You know, we always talk about solutions and how maybe we can push them forward. But at the center of every action, or at the center of every solution, we need to think of how we are going to empower the young generation who will be holding these solutions to account, or at the same time feeling the pain that these solutions didn't make any impact. So I'll focus much on that. And on that, let me comment that in Action Track 5, we do have a youth resilience team that will be working entirely in the role of the work of Action Track 5. At the same time, some of these youth, and I'm looking forward to the chair Salim and Sandrine, that if we can empower some of these youth to be the co-leads of some of the subclusters, that would be quite necessary, because much as these solutions are within these subclusters, the youth have to be isolating some of the solutions that are targeting the youth and pushing them forward within their systems, within their networks and the like. And to this fire, I'm also looking forward to the participants that are here. Our team is not limited to 13 of us, 13 youth networks of us. We wanted to grow our network because our focus is after the summit, how are we going to push these solutions to the next step? So if you do have youth from your angle, from your institutions working on resilience, please bring them in. I will share my email address. At the same time, I'm going to share some of the links to our group so that you can invite your youth to our list. And at the same time, our focus will be to enhance resilience, especially in the fragile and the conflict zones. And I can share a lot of examples on that in terms of how youth have championed peace within the conflict and fragile zones. So this will be our areas of impact or our areas of focus next forward. Let me also shift the gears to the Youth Pledge, which is an initiative that is GAIN and Food Foundation are focusing on having youth actions and having millions of support or millions of signatures to support youth-led action. This is quite a good initiative. And I'll also share the link to our launch on 18th of May so that you can take a look at some of the youth action that I managed from the youth networks or from the youth, which will be able to shape our food systems moving forward. So I look forward to more engagement in terms of the youth. And I'm pleased to say that I have seen the great engagement of the vice chairs from other action tracks. For instance, Lana, who just shared the presentation on behalf of Action Track 2, we'll be working entirely together with all these vice chairs from the Action Track in terms of how we can push youth initiative forward. Thanks so much. Looking forward to further discussion, further engagement.
Thank you, Mike. And please do share these links and your email address as well so that people can connect with you. So I think Elizabeth is now online. And so we would love to hear from you, Elizabeth. Over to you.
Hello, Elise, and good afternoon, evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen and excellencies. Yes, I'm delighted to be here to speak on behalf of the UK about the important links between Action Track 5 resilience and the UK's presidencies of in 2021 of COP26 and indeed G7, and it's a very busy year for food security, rightly so, and we greatly welcome the UN staging this summit to draw global attention to the need to make progress against particularly SDG 2, but all SDGs. What I wanted to talk about briefly is some of the ways in which we're seeking to link themes that we've inputted to on the UNFSS into our work on COP26 and G7. In terms of UK inputs to UNFSS, we prioritised UK input to Action Track 5 on resilience and Track 3 on nature positive production, as these have got really close links to our G7 resilience and food security work and to our COP26 objectives. So to this end, we submitted game changes to Action Track 5, ones that we see as being able to bring actors together to deliver a more holistic response to the need to build the resilience of food systems. And critically, we've submitted ideas around securing political and financial support for an enlarged global food security and monitoring platform based, of course, in IPC chronic and acute standards, which is the global gold standard, to provide a more regular, a more real-time and more comprehensive data and long-range forecasts, so we know where the need is greatest. Also to secure greater commitment to increase our targeting of our longer term livelihoods assistance to highly vulnerable areas, with the impact of doubling livelihoods investment being made in conflict affected regions and countries at high risk of extreme weather events due to climate change, doing more in nexus geographies. And we're also calling for the rollout of anticipatory action across the humanitarian system, so supporting an early warning food security monitoring with pre-agreed triggers for early action to avert future crises. And through our input to Action Track 3 on nature positive production, we sought to build links and coherence with our COP26 presidency, and we focused on the need to transition to climate resilient, sustainable agriculture. The game changer we submitted here is also part of our COP26 Sustainable Agriculture campaign. It builds on the Just Rural Transitions Initiative, which was first launched at UNCAS 2019. And as a part of that, we're now convening a dialogue on the transition to sustainable agriculture, which is examining options for repurposing public policies and support to agriculture. We've also developed an engagement strategy to align and run through the UNFSS to COP26. And that engagement strategy includes peer-to-peer exchange, knowledge sharing, and inclusive dialogues with governments, farmers, knowledge partners and businesses. And 26th of April, we had a first government-to-government dialogue involving ministers of agriculture from 13 countries. In terms of next steps, there's going to be a sequence of technical dialogues and a second ministerial, all timed to align in with UNFSS. And in parallel, the Just Rural Transition and its range of international partners is convening wider stakeholder engagement. And we plan to bring those strands together at the UNFSS pre-summit. So an incredibly busy year, rightly so, for food security, for food systems, and really important that we coordinate between the many different moments and opportunities this year to ensure that our results are greater than the sum of our individual parts. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And indeed, food systems resilience and climate feedback loops are really, really important to be taken into account in the new NDCs that are being prepared by member states. So this is the end of our last session. I'm now going to hand over to both Sandrine and Salim to close this open forum. Thank you so much for your attention. It's been a very rich discussion, so many inspiring speakers, and we'll be in touch also for the next open forum. I believe my colleague Mimansha will also upload the slides on the community platform, and please stay in touch. Over to you, Sandrine and Salim. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. I just wanted to thank all of you, and also first of all, the great and wonderful input that we have received from all speakers, starting off with our leads, and then obviously with the action track leads, and now the champions that have spoken on some of the key issues within their own countries and opportunities and solutions that they're putting forward. What I'm hearing from the chat is some concerns around the openness of this summit and the action tracks to take into consideration a systems approach. So I'd like to just indicate that we're doing our very best to not get stuck in the usual silos. We have also revealed in many cases that the national dialogues need to be more open as well, and not just coming from the perspective of agricultural ministries. So part of the silo breaking is also ensuring that the usual political system is shifting to take into consideration the broader base of ministries that need to be involved in the food system. The other key point that I'm hearing is that this is the usual UN speak in some, and that there's not enough smallholder farmers, etc., that are included. I think that definitely Christine, who was speaking on behalf of the livelihoods of people and a smallholder farmer herself previously, would actually contest that very much. And I think all of us, and including myself and Salim have made it very clear that we are open to bringing in all the knowledge from the smallholder farming communities, from indigenous peoples, but also from scientists, which is the other key point that is coming up in the chat, which is that everything has to be based on science-based evidence. Now, as a scientist myself, I would tend to agree that science-based decision-making is fundamental, but I would not limit ourselves just to science. I think it's clear that what we need to understand is that the many years of traditional agricultural practices that have worked in many communities are being actually taken away by large-scale agricultural practices that are not servicing the people, nor bringing prosperity to people. And in Action Track 5, we very much are looking at the balance that needs to be brought forward between new agroecology, regenerative agricultural practices, the need to look at how small-scale farmers can truly thrive within their communities, and that we can ensure that across different zones, including, as we indicated, fragile and conflict-related zones, we can continue to feed people while preserving and giving back to the planet. Let's remember that regenerative agriculture is not just about producing food, it's about also looking at carbon stocks and ensuring that we are regenerating the planet and regenerating the land at the same time. We have an incredible team of leaders that are working together through Action Track 5. We'd like to thank very much the agencies, the FAO, and all the others, WFP and others that are joining us in Action Track 5 to ensure that we can think through the different solutions together. And we're very much open to speaking to those of you who have joined today and who have different ideas and who feel that somehow we've missed a trick, because clearly there's a lot to do in this decade of action, and we can't do it in silos and we can't do it by ourselves. So we're very open, myself and Salim, to working with as many of you as possible to build these coalitions and to truly make this an action summit that has real deep impact in shifting the system. So I'll pass it over to Salim. I know that Salim has some very good extra words, he always does, to share. And again, to thank the ambassadors, the excellencies, all of you for being with us and supporting our work.
Great, thank you very much, Sandrine. I won't take too much time. I recognize and acknowledge and thank everybody for spending so much time with us, and particularly for your inputs and advice. It's been a very, very rich discussion. I'll just make two additional points to what Sandrine made. Firstly, on the issue of resilience, you'll recall I read out the UN definition of resilience at the very beginning, but I'll now end by giving you my personal reflection on resilience. To me, resilience is about making the poorest, most vulnerable people on the planet more resilient. In any country, the poorest, most vulnerable people in that country, whether they be small-scale farmers producing the food, or they be people living in the slums of the cities, eating very little food and the wrong kind of food. We need to take them as our primary customers in terms of building resilience. That's my take on the notion of resilience. And I take to heart the contributions from His Excellency Shamim Hassan from Bangladesh and from Fiji. We certainly want to take the vulnerable countries perspective, and you've made a very good reflection in that we are not getting really a lot of engagement from many of the developing countries as we would like to have, and we would seek your support and help to reach out to your fellow ambassadors and tell them Action Track 5 is open for them to contact us. We would very much like to engage with them. And the final point I'll make is to just reiterate something about this summit. This is an unusual summit. It's not about agreeing something new. It's not about having text and the right words in and negotiating those words as many other UN summits have done. This is about agreeing on actions, what to do, take things forward. And so my appeal to everybody who is on this call and your friends and your colleagues is look at what we have. And if you see something that is of interest to you, don't criticize us, join us to make it better. Join the club. This is your opportunity to do that. Between now and the pre-summit, no point throwing stones at us because we will do whatever we would do. But if you join, you can shape the way we take things forward. You can become part of the process. And I'm inviting you personally to join us and shape what we are doing and taking it forward and try and make it the way you want it to be. I'm very open to letting people in. We have a very broad mandate to talk to everybody, to listen to everybody, and to take everybody's views into account. Whether or not they eventually make it to the pre-summit and the summit, we shall see. But from our side, as chairs of Action Track 5, I can promise you on behalf of Sandrine and myself, we are willing to take it forward and push it if we think that that is the right thing to do. So please join us, please shape what we are doing, and please help us take it forward. I'll stop there and thank everybody and my colleagues for organizing this event behind the scenes, Elise for doing the moderation, and Mimansha for organizing everything behind the scenes. Thank you, and let us call it a night for me in Bangladesh. It's now 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. So it's been a long day. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.